Coming up on today's episode of The Health Review.
So many problems at root involve emotional instability. Becoming jealous, anxious, becoming obsessive. If you can just turn down the emotional instability, so much smooths out. We get caught up in a sort of spiral of bad ideas and they piggyback on each other, and before you know it, you've gone down this rabbit hole that you can avoid. When you just look at the contexts, you can start to see why things are like they are.
Hi guys, welcome back to The Health Review. I'm Emily, and today I'm joined by psychotherapist and author Toby Ingham for a powerful conversation about emotional stability, trauma, and recovery. We talk about childhood experiences and how they can silently shape our adult lives, and how recognizing our emotional patterns can be the key to long-term change. Toby shares insights from his new book, A Guilty Victim, a raw and important story about grooming, trauma, and the long road to healing. We unpack everything from retroactive jealousy to boarding school syndrome and practical tools for living with more emotional consistency. This episode is both deeply human and incredibly helpful. I really think and very much hope you're going to take a lot from it, just like I did. Please welcome Toby to The Health Review. Toby, thanks for coming on The Health Review. Thanks for joining me today. You've been practicing as a psychotherapist for 25 years. Amazing. You must have seen such a wide range of people in that time.
Yes.
Loving reading your book, A Guilty Victim, which recently came out.
Came out in March, yes. It's a case study, and it's quite a collaborative project written with the client involved was a collaborator.
Mm-hmm. I really like it. And the central thesis of the book is around how unresolved emotional trauma, how it can affect us, and that sort of emotional pain can stem from emotional traumas that perhaps haven't been resolved, rather than this sort of internal dysfunction that I think a lot of people might think is going on. So you discuss that in the book around your client, William.
Yes.
He's got a pseudonym
he has a pseudonym, yes,
to protect his identity. How did you come up with the book? Why did you want to get it out there?
Well, the idea for the book really came from William, and the book itself, A Guilty Victim, is a case study of possibly around about 8 years' work we did together. Towards the end of that work, he started to produce a timeline, it's in the book actually, a set of pictures that helped him understand how life had developed. Because what I'm really interested in is that it's not that there's something wrong with us, but it's really that things have happened to us. But generally speaking, we lose track of those things. Trauma dysregulates us, makes it hard to remember things, and so forth. Now, when we got towards the end, William had produced this set of pictures. I mean, they were quite a thing. They were 9 meters in length. And he said that he thought that this should be a book and that I should write the text. And so the whole thing really began from there. I spent a while thinking, was that ethical? Would it be the right thing to do? And in the end, I started experimenting with it and decided that I could see how this could work. And we went from there.
And it's an interesting journey for William. He comes into your office a very different person to when he finishes his therapy with you.
Yes.
And perhaps has many realizations over those 8 years about himself, the emotional trauma that he's been through, emotionally unavailable parents, sexual abuse at a Catholic boarding school, bullying while he was there.
Yes.
Some really sort of troubling problems that happened to him when he was young that perhaps he hadn't connected the dots when he was older and suffering with depression and very low self-esteem. Can you tell us more about that and how he sort of made that link with you?
When he first came to see me, he presented as you say, he was around 50. He was depressed, low mood. He was drinking very heavily. He'd had suicidal episodes earlier in his life and had a bit of a concern they might be returning. But his whole focus was on the idea that the problems related to now, or at very best, they related to something that had happened when he was about 13, which was not to do with abuse. It was to do with having been kind of bullied and excluded at a boarding school. And, he took a while to become open to my ideas that this might really relate back even further, that these patterns of dysfunction and unhappiness might go back before the boarding school. So, to start with, the tension between us, it could be difficult, and quite hard to work with. But you make a really good point. By the time he leaves, we were in a very different place.
And I'm guessing that was a very gradual process with him.
Yes, I think that's right. You read a book, it doesn't take very long to read the book. You go over the work like that and you can lose track. I mean, I can lose track of just how long it took. But we worked together for a long time, sometimes several times a week. It was a big piece of work. I mean, often in psychotherapy, what happens is a lot of work breaks off prematurely. And it's unusual to get the chance to go really from the very beginning to the very end of something. And then to be asked to write about it and to be given the opportunity to do that was really extraordinary. And now here I am talking to you about it. So, the whole thing's been remarkable.
I think there are some really sort of relatable moments in the book, how childhood traumas, childhood experiences can affect you in ways that perhaps you didn't realize. And I think that's a really important sort of message to get out there. And one of the themes in the book is how William's sort of powerful inner critic really disrupted his progression, his creativity. He is a creative guy.
Absolutely.
As the pictures show, but that whole side of him disappeared partly due to this kind of inner criticism going on. How common do you think this is?
Well, yes. So William referred to this as the Uber mallet, this kind of big hammer that would come down and crush any ideas he had. And this was traceable throughout his life. So when he was at school, there was a story about him being shown a picture and him having an interest to know more about the picture, but almost immediately feeling this is for other people, it's not for you. And that was the kind of prohibitive Uber mallet. How common is it? I suppose that has to be worked out on a case-by-case basis, doesn't it? But maybe it was the level of the suppression was more severe in William's case. I mean, as I say, he did veer towards an end of depression that could involve suicidal thinking. So I think maybe it was more extreme with him, but I think we may all be aware that there are, or maybe not all of us, but a lot of us might be aware that we live with certain prohibitive thoughts, certain ideas we've somehow internalized along the way that lead us more towards feeling we're guilty or not good enough or don't deserve things. And I think unless we find a way to take those on, they can be very shaping.
To end up in that situation where you're having those thoughts about yourself, I guess for a lot of people there has been some sort of trauma. Is it common that a lot of people suppress those traumas? Because I feel like in conversations I've had with, I don't know, friends and stuff, where you say, I actually don't remember, quite a bit, or you ask a friend, how do you remember, what was that like? And oh gosh, I just can't, I've sort of blocked it out, I just don't know. Is that common as well, to sort of really forget moments of your childhood which could be impacting you as an adult?
Well, I think forgetting is absolutely common. And if you go back into the history of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, then forgetting might be thought of as a kind of defensive system. But I suppose for a lot of us, our lives might not feel so dysregulated or difficult or complicated that we have to start investigating these things. For a lot of us, it might not stand out that we, have this problem with memory, or that there's something that we can't remember that's getting in the way, or whatever it might be.
In terms of the grooming that William went through, that is something that's mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
Are there any psychological sort of markers that someone might display if perhaps they've been through something like that when they were younger?
Well, I think in this case with William, the aspect of the story that involved grooming took a long time to surface. And in fact, it came up because he described this intense loneliness and unhappiness at the boarding school, but said that he was comfortable, or there was something he mentioned about a priest. And I was interested to know more about this, and he became very defensive about that person. And I didn't, go on at him about it, but I thought, I wonder what that's about. And in fact, at that point in our work together, and it's in the book, he said that he'd stand by that person in court. Whereas, now he's come with me and been interviewed and speaking about what's happened much more openly. I think grooming is a complicated subject, and it's one of the reasons that I wanted to write the book, to try and explain more about how it works. Because, and the reason of the title, A Guilty Victim, I think that's often the way the groomed person is left feeling. Because when people groom, they can do so under the guise that everything they're doing is being done for your benefit, So in this case, William was being given tobacco, which was his one sort of saving thing whilst at the school. So the priest who was giving him the tobacco stands out as a good guy because I'm doing what you want. But at the same time, the priest starts to gradually touch him more, and that follows its own kind of arc. But sometimes I'll meet someone who's, in their 40s, and they'll be telling me about something that's gone wrong in a marriage. And they'll be telling me about what's happened in a way that really doesn't seem to fit with what they've been through. So, for example, they've been betrayed, let down, and so on. Yet they speak in this very almost gratitude terms to the partner. And I often try and find out what's happened here, because I'd understand if actually you didn't want to be in the same room as this person, yet you're having them stay over at the weekends, and you've just found out that something terrible's happened. So I think the way people can be caught up in coercive grooming relationships is complicated. And I hope that the book contributes to some thinking about that.
Absolutely. I think it must have been really challenging for William, because you've got that sort of those conflicting thoughts for him where, yes, this priest was supporting him. The tobacco, as you say, it was a really challenging time. He wrote to his parents begging to leave this boarding school, even though the life he had back at home wasn't particularly great and he wasn't getting the emotional attention that he needed and support from his parents. But he must have sort of been feeling that bad about being at boarding school that he would still have rather have gone home. So to have those moments of, at first, it was relief. He wasn't being sexually abused by this priest immediately. It took a while.
Took a while.
So he had these sort of initial feelings of relief, having the tobacco, which he really enjoyed, and maybe having a moment's peace from the bad stuff that he was experiencing about boarding school at the time. And then came, as you say, the abuse. So it must have been a really challenging sort of topic for him to confront, and feeling all these mixed feelings. And I think that probably highlights sometimes the nuances around these characters that can come in your life and these experiences, and how sometimes if they are grooming you, you may initially feel actually they're a positive figure.
Yes. And
that can, I guess, relates to the guilty victim and the title of the book, which I think is a super interesting thought. I'm interested also in the boarding school aspects of it. Okay. There's this whole sort of boarding school syndrome, which people talk about. Is that real, do you think? Have you, in terms of, you've seen many other clients that you've worked with, is that something you've seen show up perhaps in emotional problems later on?
Well, boarding school syndrome, which really stems, I think, from Joy Shaverin's work as a title, has caught a certain amount of attention and so on. And there is a lot of work on the ABCD of boarding school syndrome. I didn't set out to write a book about boarding school syndrome, though maybe this does inform thinking about what happens at boarding schools and so on. But to my view, often the problems that we have, we take to the school. So they already existed as attachment issues in our families, and then we're sent to school. But there are a lot of people for whom boarding school syndrome has become a very meaningful way of making sense of what they've been through. So I think it's, I give it full respect.
Yeah.
But it isn't really it isn't exactly where I came into the conversation on.
It's interesting because I think sometimes people who have been to boarding school, not everyone obviously, but some perhaps have an extra guard up or an extra layer of being uncomfortable with being emotionally vulnerable perhaps. And I just wonder whether there's a link between having that level of distance from your family at a younger age and whether that can affect you in terms of your ability to be emotionally vulnerable later on.
Yeah, I mean, I think with all of these things, they're so individual, aren't they? Because a lot of people, I'm sure, would say boarding school, was a wonderful experience, and they love the autonomy and the responsibility and who knows what. But I think for other people who've had to deal with their bullying whilst living in in an environment a long way from home, where there's no escape and you're in a dormitory, and then if the teaching staff themselves have a kind of malign intent, then those people I think I can understand that it does leave a mark. But as I say, I'm still interested myself in taking the context from longer than that. Maybe that's not entirely fair, but that's sort of where I am at the moment. So I think, things can happen at boarding school that particularly disrupt us. Sometimes things were already going on before. In the story of A Guilty Victim, William, his problems begin he starts to recognize that his problems began at a point where he couldn't remember who he might have been before them. And that probably fits with a lot of boarding school sufferers and survivors too. So I think they're complicated subjects. And to be unhappy anywhere at any time is complicated, isn't it? Boarding school, I think, can really kind of exacerbate that sense of vulnerability.
And I guess also for him, you go back to some of the core memories he's had of being very young and perhaps not being attended to by his parents at points, and memories of being, in his crib and waiting, and that's, awfully sad. And I find it interesting and hard how you would unlock those memories almost so far back, but I guess it's a core feeling that he had about that time.
It was a set of core feelings. He was able to corroborate some of the experience with he's got two slightly older siblings. And so he was able to talk to them a bit about it. And one of them features in the book. But yes, I mean, we tried to develop and show to a reader an idea of what the very early abandonment may have been like. And that's, as you say, an abandonment when he's, 2 years old, perhaps.
So maybe perhaps more of a feeling than a clear memory of what actually happened. Maybe a feeling of something wasn't right, and what was that, and maybe try investigating it. Yes,
certain memories remained, certain memories related to smell. So he could remember, for example, being left in the cot, and that the way the cot smelt of urine, and he could remember some of the kind of nappy soreness and things like that. And I guess they'd been talked about a bit in the family. So there was a way of piecing some of the loose bits of kind of archaeology together.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget, as adults, how much these early memories, how important they are. And I guess that's something that you really sort of look into with your clients.
Well, I sort of treat my work as organic, and I try and just really follow what people bring, so I don't sort of start digging for things that they aren't bringing. Yes, I mean, with some people, it's very surprising how old an experience of unhappiness is. And for example, if you have a traumatic bereavement, the loss of a parent early in childhood, people might struggle to remember lots about that, but they'll have, let's say, a sensation. Maybe they went to the funeral, they can remember being by the coffin, and an odd memory that was mum. Or particular kinds of things stand out for people who've been through traumatic moments. And then at certain points in a conversation with me, we might find our way to touching them. And that doesn't mean they ever become, much bigger. They don't turn into sort of, big films or something. But we know that they fit into the story. They're one of the dots that link up this person's whole journey.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying today's episode, please do subscribe or give it a follow so we can keep giving you excellent content and bringing on amazing guests that hopefully you're loving on the Health Review podcast. Now back to the show. A Guilty Victim obviously is your latest book that came out in March, but you have got a couple of other books out there. You've written previously that many sort of psychological issues, OCD, ADHD, anger problems, sometimes jealousy, they can stem from sort of a lack of emotional stability. That's something that I think most people can relate to at points in their life where they feel like they'd like a bit more emotional stability. Are there any pieces of advice you'd have for people who might be interested in exploring, maybe they have ADHD or something and they're looking to find more consistency in their life?
Absolutely. I mean, I became interested in the question of emotional stability kind of along the way. And I realized that if you could look after that better, then you can stop a lot of other things going wrong. So in terms of looking after ourselves better, there's all sorts of things we can do, and a lot of them are really simple and they're not expensive. So I would say, for example, if we can slow down when we're in, so if we recognize, we do need to recognize that we're becoming a bit, let's call it emotionally unstable. And a marker of that for me might be that I'm projecting ideas about what people think about me. And I can recognize, I'm doing that. So they might not like me, but I'm actually the one thinking it. No one's said anything. And I'll take that as an indicator that something of my own emotional instability is kind of acting up, right? So I think if you can spot that you have that tendency, then you can do all kinds of things. And I'd say number one is slow down. Because often what happens is we get caught up in a sort of spiral of bad ideas and they piggyback on each other. And before you know it, you've gone down this rabbit hole that you can avoid. So I'd say slow down. You don't need to rush. Get a more settled tempo together. I would say consider that this vulnerability, emotional instability, may be to do with much older injuries than anything that's happening in the here and now. So often in relationships, people might start to feel that they're not safe or something like that. And, that may not be anything to do with the relationship. It may be that we feel a bit like that when we start to become intimate with people. And so we might be able to recognize, actually, this is a bit typical for me. I'm not going to treat it as a fact. I'm just going to take it as a thought and just try and slow down, okay? So to think that this might be about an older issue, and of course, that's what you might come and talk to me about.
Yes.
Or someone like me.
Because it takes a level of being able to actually see that about yourself. You've got to
Yes.
be able to recognize it. And I think that is the first part that actually most of us at points are missing. And maybe seeing someone like yourself would actually raise, I'm recognizing something here that I've had a discussion about with someone like yourself, where maybe it's like holding a mirror. And actually sometimes relationships are good for that, where your partner might flag up, you do this when you get defensive or you behave in a certain way when I bring this up, and that can be helpful. But I think it takes quite a lot of being able to self-reflect, recognizing that's not always easy, is it?
No, and I think that's where a psychotherapist can be helpful. I think in my own story, that was something I came to recognize very early, a kind of way of noticing something about myself. And I think my psychotherapy practice, and the reason I've been in it a while, is really that it's all built on that thread. It's all been really a project of trying to follow the way in which I can be vulnerable in this area. And I just wanted to say two things. One is be careful around drink and drugs, right? Because drink and drugs are no good for emotional stability. And if you just cut that out, you're probably more settled. Okay, that was one thing I wanted to say. But the other thing is that I did write about this in a book on emotional stability, but I had an idea in that book that you could think about this like having a weak ankle. Okay, now if you've got a weak ankle, you sprain it very easily. But if you remember you've got a weak ankle and you look after it, then you can go around running, dancing, jogging. Everything's fine. You just have to remember it. It's when we do the drinking, taking the drugs, get caught up in our projections, those are the moments that we forget, oh yes, I've got this weak ankle. And the next thing you know, you've sprained it. In this analogy, you've lost the emotional stability.
Yeah, love that analogy.
Okay, people have liked it.
Yeah.
So I think people have found it memorable. Emotional stability is like looking after a weak ankle. And I think we should teach that at school, personally, because there's no doubt that, as you referred to, so many problems at root involve emotional instability, becoming jealous, anxious, whatever they may be, becoming obsessive. If you can just turn down the emotional instability, if you can look after your ankle, so much smooths out.
Also, the kind of mind-body aspect of it. I love that you mentioned drink and drugs, because that's something that, you know, I've been discussing a lot on the podcast with people who are experts in certain health fields about how important it is to look after our bodies as well, and what a difference you can feel if you're sleeping well. You know, if you're not drinking, if you cut out alcohol, cut down, you get more sleep, and then you sleep better, then you sort of feel like exercising. You exercise, you feel all the endorphins, and you eat a bit better, and it's all kind of one big circle.
Improved regulation.
Yes. And
exactly.
I think until more recently, that wasn't really so widely recognized. I think it's sort of now, obviously most of us know what we should be doing, and it feels like there's a big movement online of people sharing their transformations and their stories of quitting alcohol and drugs, and I think it's all sort of moving in the right direction. But I completely agree that is such a fundamental thing. And I know for me, you know, what works for me in terms of keeping myself emotionally stable is having a lot of discipline and not drinking and getting my 8 hours of sleep and exercising most days, and, you know, and that works for me. And to someone else that might seem a little bit drastic, a little bit too disciplined. And, you know, I've got plenty of friends where I'll go out on a Friday night and they'll all be drinking and be like, oh, come on, just, you know, have a few. But I know, well, actually, I won't feel my best for probably...
You don't drink?
No, I don't. Like, I went completely sober for about 5 years. Felt amazing, got married, and around the wedding, we did an overseas wedding with friends. So I thought, oh, I'll just have a couple of glasses here or there. And for the sort of 6 months around that time, I got into a pattern of drinking more regularly again. And I could just see that I wasn't feeling myself or as good as I could be. So I've cut back again, very rarely, like pretty much not drinking at all.
Well, I do drink, not very much, because it mainly because it interferes with my sleep.
Yeah.
But I notice that if I drink, I'm more likely to start to be projecting odd ideas around and things like that. And, you know, my ankle needs looking after.
Yeah. And it's annoying because, you know, you do get that initial relief if you're a bit stressed, you've had a busy week. A lot of people with stressful jobs, busy lives, parents, you know, a lot of parents struggle, you know, if they're a bit overwhelmed, having that nice time to unwind with a glass of wine or two, brilliant. But in the long term, you know, I don't know, I've definitely felt the benefits. So I completely agree with that shift in terms of looking after yourself and prioritizing your body and how important that could be.
Well, and in this case, I'm really just from the perspective of the emotional stability, because I think I'll have lots of conversations with people, and not invariably, but often the problemed events they're describing happen around, you know, an evening of drugs or something, and you think, well, I mean, it's not really a surprise, is it, that everything went to pieces?
Absolutely, it's so obvious.
It's so predictable.
I know.
And I think if we want to look after emotional stability as the number one thing, and there are, you know, a lot of us, I think it's really helpful to do that. And if we do that, then everything's simple. Yeah.
In an ideal world. It's just a bit harder in practice, isn't it? But do you think with emotional stability that some people are just born with this inner sense of calm, or is it something you can learn and train yourself along with those kind of maybe cutting down on bad things?
I think that there are people who were born into emotionally stable homes and they internalized that kind of rhythm of stability and regulation. And I think that's a wonderful thing if that happened. But I think for a lot of us, it's not like that. And life, we're born into, our parents weren't quite ready, or because no one really has an idea till a child comes along what's going on, and then it's even more confusing.
Yeah.
So for a lot of us, I think it wasn't the case that we were born into these stable patterns. I think we often don't recognize it until a kind of adolescence. I think adolescence really turbocharges all of the vulnerabilities and idiosyncrasies that developed at an early age, but were a bit dormant till all the hormones come in. But then I think with adolescence, with sex, drugs, rock and roll, when all of that comes in, then you start to find out more about what your psychological framework is like. And so I think some people are born with it. That doesn't mean they're necessarily always going to have it, because they might, get knocked off course at adolescence. Other people, don't have it from the start. Adolescence is really complicated. They suddenly find they've been thrown out of school. They don't know what happens next. They're 18, 19, 20, and what do they do? So I think some people might have it, but even if we don't have it to start with, we can develop it, 100%.
Okay, that's promising.
Yeah, 100%. We can develop it. All we need to do is recognize that we need it.
The recognition
That's
is the
key.
main point, and I think that's where
Yes.
a lot of people stumble. And I guess what are the sort of questions you could ask yourself?
A really simple thing to do, because I think it's helpful if we understand the contexts of our problems. And one of the things that happens in A Guilty Victim is that William draws out this simple but elaborate timeline of his life. And he starts to see that his low moods and things relate to events that happen. So I would say to anybody, if we can just look at the contexts around the low mood, the low self-esteem, or the issues you mentioned, because they all have contexts. Things tend not just to fall out of the sky. They tend more to develop A follows B follows whatever. And any of us can draw out that timeline. So I think that my advice would be just start drawing out the events. And often when I start working with people, I do an assessment, and in the assessment I draw out the family tree. And in the family you can see, okay, the parents separated when this child was 8. They've got 3 siblings. There's a big gap in one, and who knows. And I can see, as I'm drawing that out, that there are patterns of dysregulation. That how did you handle the fact that the parents suddenly separated? Dad moved to another country, married twice, then came back and was, drunk for the rest of his life or something. When you just look at the contexts, you can start to see why things are like they are, and why, if you have this extra drink in this club on this night, you may be more likely to feel vulnerable and emotionally unstable. It's
kind of connecting the dots, and then
exactly
trying to think ahead, and maybe in the moment as well, like recognizing these moments and being cautious with the ankle analogy, sort of having an extra layer of protection around you at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to a lot of people, I kind of encourage the words emotional stability as a mantra. And I say to them, when you brush your teeth, morning and night, say those words to yourself. Just remind yourself that you need to look after that ankle. Fundamental thing. Do that, everything else will be fine.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Good.
I'm interested in retroactive jealousy.
Okay.
This is something else you've written about.
Yes.
I guess controversial sometimes. People don't like opening up about their potential jealous tendencies in relationships, things like that. What is retroactive jealousy, and where does it stem from?
So retroactive jealousy is, well, I'll define it like this. It's becoming anxious about your partner's former partners. Okay, so being jealous about the fact that your partner has had previous relationships. Where does it come from? So it's let me answer that a couple of ways.
Yeah.
So number one, the way I understand it is it's a social media diagnosis.
Right.
Right. In old money, or from the kind of training that I did, it would be understood more as an obsessional neurosis, obsessional anxieties. But I think what's happened in conjunction with social media is there's where now anyone can look at their partner's posts and see who liked them and start to track how they are still in touch with this old person that, I can see they were on a holiday with them in, Corfu in 10 years ago or something. Social media has made it much more possible to obsess as we scroll and search through all the social media platforms about what our partners have been up to. So that's kind of how it operates, and it became given this title, Retroactive Jealousy. But as I say, to my view, it's an older problem. And when I work with people on this, what I try and understand is the way in which the fuel that is firing all this obsessional activity, where is it coming from? And typically, if not always, I would say that it relates to older issues. So when I sketched out that family tree, the parents separate when the child's 7. Let's say there were a couple of siblings. The elder sibling never got on with the other 2 younger ones. There were relationship dynamic problems from the get-go. The mother preferred the 3rd child, but didn't look after the 2nd in quite the same way. You can see in my consulting room the way in which these patterns are much older than dating.
Right.
But I think what happens, like I was saying, is that when we get to adolescence, we don't know we've got those vulnerabilities. We don't know we've got weak ankles around intimacy. And then suddenly we're dating and things are rushing ahead.
Yes.
And that's when we can find ourselves starting to relive all these earlier anxieties. So I wrote a book about it because I thought that the books that were on retroactive jealousy are really, I thought, inadequate. They focus entirely, it seems to me, on stopping yourself searching your partner's social media, which is helpful.
Yeah, as a tool.
But they tend not to consider where the earlier vulnerability may have been in the first place.
Yes. And do you think it's often sort of, for some people, it can be one event that can create this cascade in your life, and suddenly you're in this situation, because I think for a lot of people it's just hard if it's not as obvious as the perhaps the sibling scenario that you came up with. I guess for some people it might be hard to really try and link it back. Like where does this come from? Could it be, for instance, an insecurity issue where insecurity leads to jealousy because they're not feeling good enough?
Yes, it could, but I think that insecurity tends to itself have an old root. It's not that we were suddenly made insecure, at secondary school, though secondary school is really complicated. I think what happens it's at those moments in our lives when we get put under these particular stresses that the older insecurities come out.
So you've suggested in your book about this that maybe things like CBT might not be enough for helping this. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it can be very helpful in sort of calming yourself down, stopping bad activities like scrolling and searching through your partner's social media, or wanting to go through people's phones, or any of those appalling but consequential kind of obsessional activities that happen if you let this run amok.
Yeah.
I think CBT is good for managing outbreaks and flare-ups.
Yeah.
But it may not be quite so good at helping us understand the origin of the fuel that fires all of these anxieties in the first place. And I suppose that's what I'm more interested in. So if people come to see me, I try and help them stabilize the situation in the present, check out the ankles, that sort of thing. But then see if we can understand where this reservoir of fuel is that gets burnt up in these situations.
And if someone's in that retroactive jealousy loop right now, what advice would you have for them?
Similar to the emotional stability, I'd say, look, just slow down, step back from this, put down the drink, put down anyone's phone, step away from social media. I'd start there. I'd maybe see if you can sketch out the context. When does this tend to flare up? When did it happen last? When did it start? How old is this? Has it been a feature of all of your relationships? When you started having relationships, what was going on? I.e., were you being bullied or picked on or excluded or something like that? Try and create the space to think a bit. I don't think you're in the grip necessarily of something that's wrong in the relationship. I think that it's more likely that older vulnerabilities of your own are being projected into that relationship. You may not be under the threats that you feel yourself to be now. Those threats may actually be, they may already have really happened a long time in the past. So in short, I'd say slow down, look after yourself.
Is it sometimes, you'll have an obvious explanation of one sibling was treated better than the other, or someone told you you're not good enough, at a young age, and you internalize that. But can it sometimes be that the environment you're in is unstable for some reason, and that can lead to feelings of insecurity and sort of unworthiness as an adult?
Well, I think that very much depends who you are, because there are probably certain people who will feel confident and stable in those environments, and other people may feel more threatened. So if you take a party group, or a party that's happening, there's probably people in that room that are enjoying themselves and feeling very settled, and then at sort of different stages or areas, there'll be people that aren't maybe quite having that kind of a time. And of course, social situations are very dynamic. So everything changes and gets exaggerated. And I think to navigate a social group and the various ways in which people might have relationships with different people in the same group, I think that takes a fairly level psyche, really, because it is quite provocative to think that, I liked this person, now they like that person, and I'm on my own, or, I'm with them now, but they used to be with them. And so I think we have to look after ourselves. Some people, maybe that comes much more naturally, and others, it's look after your ankles.
It's interesting how, a lot of comedians, they say that they came from an unhappy household, or parents who were depressed, and they felt this urge and need to entertain. And a lot of people, I think, in the entertainment industry can relate to that, where perhaps they've had this, yearning desire since they were young to lighten the mood or to cheer their family up. And it's really interesting when you make these links to such early memories, it kind of leads to these, big epiphany moments.
And I think you see that in patterns where people become particularly compliant in relationships, and partners who'll go along with anything that's happening but are unhappy. And you that pattern of compliance maybe goes right back. So now someone's married to a man who they find difficult when they drink, and they go to bed early to avoid it. And actually they remember that their parents' marriage worked very similarly. I think I think what's caught my interest in the work I do is the history of these fault lines. And so I think I've always reacted slightly to psychological interventions that say, treating the now is sufficient. I do think you have to treat the now 100%. But once you've stabilized now, then I would say, but how come Pompeii got buried in the first place? Because that's also part of the story. And just to treat this bit, I think is insufficient. Of course, not everyone thinks like that.
No, I think it is valid, and it makes sense to look at both sides of it and not just the now. So you've been working in psychotherapy for 25 years, as I said at the start.
Yes.
How have you seen sort of the industry change? How are things looking now with social media? Are you concerned about where things are going?
Well, I think the social media thing, which is so much on everyone's mind at the moment, is a real question, isn't it? I mean, I noticed myself when I stopped looking at Instagram, how quickly it becomes something that I'm not doing anymore. And then when you're in it, you're just kind of in that algorithm, aren't you? Mm-hmm. In terms of changes, I think that there's been a big shift in the interest on science-based evidence. Mm-hmm. But I think that, that's interesting, mm-hmm. but I think it may overlook a different way of thinking about evidence. Mm-hmm. So I would say that a guilty victim is the best evidence mm-hmm. of what a great psychotherapeutic relationship can do. But other people have said, well, it's based on ideas they don't like, so they're not having that or something like that. And I think that, I think we've changed in a, but I guess we're always changing. I think the social media is definitely a feature. The evidence is a question. I think we're more attached to sort of smartphone solutions. I know people now are using AI as a therapist, and asking ChatGPT for answers to things. So there are changes, but I still think that there's going to be room for the people who want to go and have a more a quieter inquiry with someone like me.
Yeah, I think perhaps the issue with the fixation on social media with eat this diet and reduce your brain inflammation, keto diet, reduces the risk of depression and anxiety, and that's all very well and good and helpful, definitely from a lifestyle perspective. Yeah, okay, if I cut out on these processed foods, I'll feel more mental clarity, and maybe that will give you the space to then investigate your mind with someone like yourself. But it almost feels like the two need to come together, where you kind of do the exploration plus you have the healthy lifestyle perhaps there as well, and the two kind of come together. Because I think for a lot of people, if you're in that cycle of drinking, not looking after yourself, destructive thoughts, to actually break from that and to take a constructive and patient journey, which William went on. That was an 8-year journey with you.
That's right.
And you had many breakthroughs across those 8 years, and it wasn't sort of just this overnight thing. And I guess with therapy, it's not meant to be that way anyway. It's meant to be the sort of gentle opening and closing of the box, almost, where it's not an overwhelming, here are all my problems on day one. It's kind of a gradual process, and that takes time.
Yes, I think that's true. And patience is certainly a feature of that. Absolutely.
I'm curious in your job, because you're seeing a lot of people. You are obviously find the process very interesting. You've been doing it for a long time. You're learning a lot about these people, but you are also hearing a lot about their traumas, their issues, and that must be quite heavy sometimes. I'm curious how you deal with that. How do you feel sort of at the end of the day if you've been having perhaps a heavier day in terms of your clients?
Well, I think it's important to have a supportive network around you. Mm-hmm. And so where I am at my stage in career, I suppose, I have a supervisor that I work with, and I've worked with for a long time. I'm a member of the BPF, so I have a network of meetings, colleagues, support groups I can go to. Mm-hmm. But I'd also say that I think that the reason I've been so involved in the work is because of how satisfying I do find it. Mm-hmm. There are some stories that surprise you in the way someone may have suffered, that do take they stay on your mind. Mm-hmm. But I would say that those are the stories, you take to supervision. There is some work that can involve dealing with very aggressive problems, which can go on a really long time, and that can be tough. Mm-hmm. But that's why the training is important, and then when I can, I get involved in teaching, because that's always very good for your own kind of ongoing education. and sharing of ideas and having conversations. So far it's okay.
So far, yeah, you're doing great. I mean, amazing career.
It's funny when you say 25 years, I have to say, yeah, but it is.
Yeah, that's amazing. And is it three books in total?
It is. I mean, I count A Guilty Victim as, the real prize on the mantelpiece. I think that the book on emotional stability is a really useful book. And I wrote the Retroactive Jealousy book and then the Emotional Stability book whilst I was trying to get this published. But I think, they've got good information in them.
Yeah, absolutely. I have loved reading A Guilty Victim, and I really want to read the other two now. So I'm definitely going to get into that soon. So thank you so much, Toby, for coming on. I've so enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I could sit here all day with you. Really amazing insights. For people who might be interested in speaking to you, finding out about your books, where can they find you online?
Toby at tobyingham.com is my website. And the books, I mean, if you Google Toby Ingham or if you Google A Guilty Victim, it'll come up on Google. So I'm not hard to find.
No, great.
But if you can put a few notes in, that will help.
I will. I'll add it in the show notes and a link to.
And I'm on Instagram, Tobias_Ingham, but I'll give you the details.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on. I've loved our conversation.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it too.